All right, so continuing with the sweat response. So we talked about thermoregulation of the blood vessels to the vital organs constrict while the blood vessels to the body surface dilate, which means they get bigger. So when we look at this, our sweat glands will produce sweat and it'll either drip off the skin or is toweled off. Most of the moisture will evaporate into the air, and this is expressed as the relative humidity. So sweat glands and sweat pores help with evaporative cooling, right? When you are looking at sweat response, large surface area to volume ratio, what that means is that we have an increased rate of heat loss or gain by conduction, convection, and radiation. So postural changes help us to maintain heat or get rid of heat. So what do we typically do when we are cold outside? We ball up. So we change into a curled up position, which changes the surface area, versus when we are all dead tired from a hard exercise, we typically lay on the ground with our arms outstretched. All right, so postural changes change the surface area to volume ratio. And this helps increase heat loss or heat gain, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Also, moving from the sun to the shade also helps. We already talked about vasoconstriction, vasodilation. Vasoconstriction happens to decrease the rate of heat loss. Vasodilation happens to increase the rate of heat loss. All right, body mechanisms to control heat production, increase or decrease your metabolic rate, and also shivering, which is an involuntary reflex of the muscles contracting. This increases energy usage and heat production. So to summarize all of that, thermoneutral zone, to keep us regulated close to that 37-degree mark, 36, 37-degree mark, we will have postural changes. We'll move from the sun or the shade, depending on what we're trying to do. If we're trying to warm up, we move to the sun. If we're trying to cool down, we move to the shade. And then sweating, right? These changes take place on the skin, and there's no change to our basal metabolic rate. But let's say we're below the thermoneutral zone, which means our body temperature is dropping. All right, typically we will shiver. And then we have a non-shivering thermogenesis that also takes place. If we do not maintain our core temperature, it begins to drop. And when it is below 35 degrees Celsius, it's considered hypothermia. This can result in death if you're not warmed up quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that when you are frozen or shivering, you put someone in a very hot tub, because they might not be able to feel the heat. So you warm them up, and you do it by warm water versus scalding hot water. All right, but let's say it's July, August, and we're outside exercising, and we're starting to feel lightheaded, dizzy. It could be a number of things. It could be we're dehydrated. It could be we're not exercising right. We're not acclimated. But it could also be that our body temperature is above the thermoneutral zone. All right, this is where our vessels are dilated to maximum, and they can't dilate anymore. So the human body is unable to lose heat at a sufficient rate, and the core temperature continues to rise. If the core temperature gets above 40 degrees Celsius, it could lead to death. So if we look at a little summarizing chart here, it makes a figure eight. Homeostasis is where we want to maintain our body temperature, 36 to 38 degrees Celsius. All right. When we rise above, we go through vasodilation, sweat glands, thermoregulation in the brain is activated. When we go below 36 degrees, then our blood vessels constrict, our skeletal muscles move rapidly, which is shivering, and it helps to get us back to homeostasis. All right, so here's a figure 8 chart, here's a box chart. They both say the same thing, just in different viewpoints. So, exercising in hot environments. When we exercise in hot, humid conditions, when the body's not accustomed to it, it puts us under great stress and reduces our exercise tolerance. We also have a perceived exertion that increases due to higher temperature and higher blood flow to the brain. So when we're not acclimated to exercising in the heat, we have that safety mechanism that comes in that says, it's getting too hot, I'm working too hard, and that's what's called perceived exertion. Okay, so what happens when we exercise in hot environments? We have a cardiovascular response, we have changes to our energy metabolism, and we have sweating. All right, so cardiovascularly, we have an increase in blood flow. When we have an increase in blood flow, we have more heat. When we come to energy metabolism, the rate of aerobic respiration decreases. It is compensated by anaerobic respiration, which means we have an increased glycogen breakdown and higher levels of muscle and blood lactate, which is why after a hard exercise in the heat of June or July, we get more tired. We also want to eat more. And the reason why is because we're expending more energy, and so our metabolism is increased. All right, this is also why fatigue sets in a lot easier when it's super hot outside, which is why we have to take that into account and take multiple breaks, drink fluids, eat small snacks. That also helps with decreasing the amount of lactate in the muscles and the blood. A high level of lactate in the muscles and the blood makes us very sluggish, and it makes our muscles very sore and tired. The other thing that happens is sweating. Sweating is very important. It is increased when we exercise in hot environments, and it is used for evaporative cooling. In that evaporative cooling, we lose water and salt. And when we have excessive sweating, we have a decrease in the volume of blood plasma, which could lead to circulatory collapse, which basically means the heart's working too hard. We don't have enough volume moving through the body with the electrolytes needed. So evaporative cooling is effective only under conditions of relative low humidity. Under high humidity, when water and sweat is unable to vaporize, the sweat simply drips off the body, which doesn't cool the body. Okay? When it vaporizes, it cools the body down through the evaporation process. Right? Heat-related disorders. We see here a relative humidity chart and temperature chart. We use this in athletics a lot, and there are days that I have to shut practices down. There are days that I have to modify practices or tell the coaches we're giving water breaks every 15 minutes. And it really depends on where we are in this range. A lot of times in August when we try to start practice at 4 in the afternoon, we're up here in the 90 plus range in temperature in Fahrenheit, and we are way over here in the 80 plus humidity. Okay, so we really have to look at those charts, and we have to monitor how much exercise we're doing out in the heat so that our athletes can acclimate properly to the environment. So we look up here, different individuals have different abilities to handle heat stress. Age, lack of fitness, lack of acclimatization, hydration levels, and body mass and clothing choices all affect our health in the heat. Clothing choices, don't wear dark clothes when you are outside in the hot. Hydration, lots of fluids while you are exercising. Right? So some specific disorders: heat cramps, heat syncope, heat exhaustion, and exertional heat stroke. Heat cramps are associated with excessive sweating, usually caused by dehydration, salt loss, and inadequate blood flow. Treatment is rehydrate and stretch the muscles. You could put them in a cooling tub. It would help with the muscle cramps, but it's not necessary all the time. Sometimes it is. Heat syncope is when you faint. It is where you have an overabundance of physical exertion in a hot environment, and blood flow to the brain is reduced because the skin vessels have dilated to increase heat loss. Treatment for syncope is to lie down in a cool environment, elevate the feet, and hydrate. Heat exhaustion is a shock-like condition that occurs with excessive sweating and dehydration. A person with heat exhaustion could have a headache, could be nauseous. The telltale sign here is they're pale and clammy with a weak and rapid pulse. They are decreased in their performance, they have dilated pupils, and they are profusely sweating. So if they're sweating a lot and they are pale, they probably have heat exhaustion. All right, exertional heat stroke is a medical emergency. It is a life-threatening condition where the thermoregulatory mechanism is overwhelmed. Right? Typically, they need to go to the hospital. Okay? This chart here summarizes some of the takeaway points. Prevention is the key. Hydrate, wear the right clothes, acclimate yourself to the environment. And that's what this is telling us here. Take breaks frequently out of the shade or in the shade. Wear the appropriate clothing. If your clothing becomes wet with sweat, change it, because then you can cool down faster because your body is not clogged with water from the outside. Drink moderate amounts of water. All right, you can also add sport drinks in there if you want, but you should not drink alcohol, tea, or soda. And then acclimate to the outdoors.